You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi. For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas. I'm Fatima, CEO at Agile Management Office, Mental Health Ambassador, and your host. This podcast is sponsored by Agile Management Office, providing high-impact delivery execution in an agile era for scaling businesses. On today's episode, I'm talking to the lovely Molood Ceccarelli. Molood is a remote work expert and an agile coach. Her work has been published in places such as Forbes, Huffington Post, and Inc.com, to name a few. She's the CEO and founder of Remote Forever, where she helps distributed companies adopt agile ways of working and helps agile companies to embrace remote work. Remote Forever also offers online courses, workshops, and online facilitation for remote events. Molood actually has a background in computer security and software development, also a passion for agile coaching and human psychology, and has a love of traveling and working remotely. She's also the founder and the host of the famous Remote Forever Summit, the first and biggest online summit about distributed agile that attracts over 10,000 attendees from around the world. Molood and her team at Remote Forever have been the driving force behind the agile adoption and scaling of a few geographically distributed organizations across various industries such as telecom, fintech, entertainment, gaming, insurance, as well as machine learning and AI. Molood is also the author of Be Agile Remotely, which she first published as an ebook in 2016. In today's episode with Molood, we talk all things remote working, and she was one of the very few people that made remote working cool well and truly before COVID even existed. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas, the podcast. I'm Fatima, your host and CEO of Agile Management Office. On today's podcast, as I've just explained to you all, we've got the wonderful Molood Ceccarelli. Is that how I pronounce it?
You're free to pronounce it the way that you want. You see, that's a French name, but it sounds Italian. And yes. I usually work with Americans and English-speaking people around the world. So yeah, go ahead with your pronunciation.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. I think you can agree we've had quite a long time coming to have this conversation. We've had to move it around a few times to meet our schedules. So it's good that it's finally happening. So welcome to the show. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, I always like to start with a positive, and I would be really keen to learn something that happened to you last week or in the last few weeks that's positive. Can you share something that's positive for you in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, well, so many things happen these days. Let's see, something positive that happened to me. I actually got to get an okay to work with a new client that is a really exciting company that I hope to become their go-to person for their remote culture. So I can't yet reveal their name because I haven't signed the contract yet, but I'm very excited for the prospect of working with this amazing company.
Excellent. That sounds amazing. I'm sure we'll see some more about it possibly online and in due course. So that's exciting. Now, I think for those that were listening, I've already given them a little bit of a background on what you do, but you're known as a remote work expert and an agile coach as well as other things. Can you just tell us a little bit about what is a remote work expert and how did you come to do that as your core job?
Absolutely. So I originally started as an agile coach. So I suppose that your audience understand what that is, or at least you have seen, the move from project management to agile coaching quite a lot in the past decades. So the work that I did was I worked as a Scrum Master or as an Agile coach in various organizations. And one of the key elements that I noticed was that all the education, all the literature in Agile was about co-location being a requirement for agility. And in my reality, in my work, every single organization that I was helping, that I was coaching, was distributed. There was no single team that had all of their members in one location. I had to struggle. I actually reached out to the recruiter at some point and he said, hey, please find me a client where the entire team is in one office because I want to experience this. But since the reality was that every team was distributed, it just sparked an idea in me that maybe the reality of work has changed. So I started by putting together an online conference, which I'm sure a lot of you already know about. It's called Remote Forever Summit. And I became the very first person to bring remote working to Agile in such a public way. So I literally went on and challenged one of the principles of the Agile Manifesto that talks about co-location, or actually face-to-face communication, being the most effective form of communication. And I called BS on that in a way. And I said, no, that's not necessary. You can actually work remotely. So that's how I became the remote work person in the Agile community. And I turned that to become my core mission, my core message. And that's what I've been doing ever since 2017.
Okay, so there's a lot of things that I kind of want to delve into deeper there, and our audience will definitely be familiar with sort of agile frameworks and concepts. But you talk about co-location versus sort of distributed teams, and I think I can definitely agree with you that I personally have also not seen any organization where their entire team is co-located. Now, the thing that stands out to me is I've got a couple of questions, but the first one I kind of want to call out is the idea itself. You decided to move forward on the basis of an online conference first. You decided to do that. I'm interested to know sort of where some people might have chosen to write a book or maybe do a webinar series. You decided to do an online conference. Now, was it because you wanted to bring people together that are distributed and demonstrate sort of agile in that way, or what was there something else that made you think about doing it as an online conference first?
That's such a good question. And I love telling this story actually, because it was a very interesting sequence of events that happened and led to that conference. So I love bringing people together. I was one of those people who would host meetups locally wherever I was. I had I had a meetup group in Stockholm where I lived, and I had another one in Barcelona where was the office of my client, which is kind of crazy. Like you don't do like meetups in two cities, but I loved bringing people together. And I've loved that since I was much, much younger. I even did that in school as a student. I was part of a community or a committee that would host events from, seminars all the way through parties for students. So that was in me to bring people together. But why an online conference was actually because the Agile community loves conference going. It is a global community where pretty much like we all used to go to these physical conferences to meet our friends, our colleagues. And that was true for a lot of other people too. That was like a yearly event that would happen. But when I wanted to create an online conference, I did not even think of it as an online conference. I thought of it as an online experience of connecting genuinely together and bringing experts to teach how to do this to other people. And obviously, it was very difficult to find people who were experts at both Agile and remote. So I brought experts of Agile and experts of remote. There was like very little correlation between the two at the time that was pronounced as it is today. When I put the event together, I created a website and I had 5 experts that had said yes. So they had become my friends and trusted advisors and colleagues over the years. With that, I launched a website and I thought if about 100 people sign up, I'd be happy. If about 200 people sign up, I'd be ecstatic. And in about an hour after I announced it on LinkedIn, we had 200 signups and I started to freak out. I thought, oh my goodness, this is becoming bigger than I thought. I am not prepared for this. Like I was going into all this ranges of emotions that you feel when you feel like something that you thought is going to be small is actually bigger. Mm-hmm. And I had to hire my friends. I hired a friend and I hired my sister and I hired a few other experts to help me like create something that would be bigger. And I started inviting more experts. So we ended up with, if I'm not mistaken, 21 experts and 2,700 attendees in that first year. And it became an online conference, not because I intended it to, but because it just seemed to be an interesting topic. And I just made it much bigger than just a one-time event.
Wow. That's a very good, very good sort of accident to happen where you don't expect to have that many people interested, and then you effectively tested out your idea by putting it out there, key to Agile, putting, testing and learning as you go, and then you get that response and effectively had to learn how to set up and run online conferences. So,
Exactly. I had to be agile about it.
Exactly, living the values and actually being true to what you were trying to achieve. I'm interested to know, you went from having an idea, testing the idea, and then going and setting up this conference. Now, naturally, that's become your business as well. So what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced when setting up this idea into a business? And maybe perhaps what were some of the ways that you overcame some of maybe the key challenges?
Well, honestly, the conference itself is not part of the business, or it's not the business itself. It is definitely part of the business. It's a very high effort, high reward uh, attempt that we have every year, and that has it led to me to start the business that I have right now. So the business that I have right now, let's just like clear that for people who are listening. So there is no confusion about the fact that, it's the conference that I do. No, the conference is just a one-time thing every year. We pour our hearts in it and it happens. But the work that we actually do is that I help entrepreneurs and business leaders to transform their operations and development processes to become more agile. So very similar to what an agile coach would do, right? But I specifically work with organizations that are distributed. And in 2020, that would be like all the companies, right? But I only
Yes.
work with those that have the intention of going remote, that understand that this is the future. So I help them create those processes, understand the mindsets, and set out their businesses for scalability in a way that embodies the agile culture, in a way that empowers those leaders and their teams to work in humane digital workplaces. So we don't become bombarded by processes and documentations, right?
Yes.
And your question was around, can you just repeat the question just so I can recall that?
Yeah, so around your biggest challenges, you set up you set up your business, and what were some of the challenges that you faced in the onset of setting up a business?
Well, okay, so here's the thing. When I created the conference, I was still not a citizen of the country that I have immigrated to. That was one of the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
The day that I got my citizenship letter, I resigned from the job that I had and I went on to register a company. So there are a lot of challenges that you face as a as a new entrepreneur who has never like had a registered business and who's going into this mode. Some of the work-related challenges that I can mention to it that are maybe not so entrepreneurial focused are convincing leaders that remote is the future.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I had this conference to show as proof that this is a demand in the market, that this is the reality of so many people. I mean, the conference has grown to be 10,000 people. And I had that proof. I still have that proof, but it was still quite difficult for high-level executives to believe that they need to invest in creating remote cultures, remote-first companies, ways to communicate effectively without needing to depend on meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pandemic happened, right? The pandemic accelerated this quite a bit. So now I don't have to work as hard to convince people. They've seen it work. They've seen the productivity, right? So that was the biggest challenge, to be frank.
I was going to ask you about that because you started this in 2017. We're now in 2021, and obviously COVID came into the world, late 2019, but really 2020 for the most part. And I was going to ask you how that's accelerated the work that you're doing, and you've just outlined that. What I'd also be interested to know, leveraging the kind of the current conversation around remote working is, do you think that remote working works for everyone?
Absolutely. It does work for everyone, but it's not ideal for everyone. A lot of people need that human touch, as they call it, in their work life, and they have never really learned how to create that kind of social connection with people that are not necessarily their work colleagues. They used to go to an office and meet their friends. They didn't really have a lot of, people outside of their group of workers to socialize with, and it's a real challenge. And COVID sent us to isolation. It didn't send us to remote work, right?
Yeah.
Remote work is about freedom to work from wherever you want. When I was able to travel, I would just go to co-working places, to cafes, to hotel lobbies, and I would meet other remote workers, and we would have a conversation. We would sometimes become friends, sometimes, start a project together. So there was that idea of serendipity that made remote working so exciting, as opposed to an office where it is engineered for you, who you can interact with. And most people are used to that idea. And now, after COVID, they are blaming remote working as like this demon that is taking something away from them, that's taking that human interaction away from them. But that's not really remote work doing that. That's the isolation of being in a pandemic, right? If you had the opportunity to work remotely every day and you didn't have a virus going around, you'd be able to interact with so many different types of people that are not necessarily your work colleagues. But also, if companies learn to create effective remote works and effective remote processes, they would also learn to hire from around the world. So even your work colleagues that you don't necessarily hug and touch and smell, you can still have a lot richer connections to other people when you learn that. So your question is, does remote work work for everyone? I think in essence, it does, if it is intentional, if the organization leadership has put the intention behind creating an inclusive remote first organization that empowers people to connect, that empowers people to collaborate.
Yeah, and I think you're really right about that. There's a lot of isolation happening with relation to COVID. Just the simple act of going to a co-working space, which is something that a lot of people did before, or even going to the office. I think that disconnect is definitely part to blame, and maybe people associate that with remote working failures, and it's not working, and we can't collaborate, and all of that sort of stuff. So I definitely agree with that point. I think a lot of communication, is also nonverbal, and I'm interested to know, how have you either seen or directed your clients who maybe one of their doubts is, well, we're not going to have that sort of face-to-face in-person interaction. We're going to be trying to collaborate and do things remotely. What are some of the ways that you've suggested to help increase collaboration whilst working remote for teams?
That is such a good question. And yes, that is actually one of the top questions that I get in the line of work that I do. Many companies, as you know, as COVID hit, they went to have online meetings because they depended on face-to-face interactions. They wanted to see other people, communicate with them, right? So instead of being in an office and going to someone and tapping their shoulder and asking them a question, they would just book a meeting in their calendar. And what we all saw happen was that our calendars got filled with meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And at the end of the day, you found yourself not having done anything at all. You had spent your time in meetings. And this started to become a problem within like 2 to 3 months of working this way. And that's when people really understood what is needed. So ways that I help people is first and foremost to understand what communication gives us. So let's just start there. What does communication look like? Like, what is communication? It is the exchange of information from one person to another. That's it. There is nothing more to that. It's the exchange of information. Now, do we need to see each other's faces to exchange information? Not necessarily. Do we communicate effectively if we see each other's faces? Now, that's the big elephant in the room in the Agile community. Many people would say, yes, we do. And I say, not necessarily. it is possible to have effectiveness in our communication using the tools and processes that we have. So all these years we've said value people and interactions over processes and tools. And I say, let's use those processes and tools that we have. Let's utilize that to empower the interactions between people. Now, how does that look like? Let's just remember that communication is divided in two different types. One is synchronous, that happens in real time. That is like what you and I are doing, Fatima. Like I see something, you see something. When we're exchanging we're having this exchange of information in real time. So that's a synchronous type of conversation. You listeners who are listening to this, you're not here with us at the time we're recording. You're listening to this later. That means it's an asynchronous type of conversation that we're having with you. It's asynchronous communication. In the world of remote working, we say that we should default our communication to be more and more asynchronous. And what does that mean? That means using the tools that we have and establishing super explicit processes to follow so that people can actually find information at the time that they need it. So instead of needing to go to a person and tap on their shoulder or booking them in their calendar and having an online meeting, that person who needs the information should know exactly where the information is and how to find that information. And it takes time to build the culture, the processes, and basically the tooling that is required to make that happen. But I'll give you a quick tip. So if you're listening, you can actually go back to your organization and make it happen. You all have a task management tool, a project management tool, whatever you want to call it, like Atlassian's Jira or Trello or Asana or Basecamp, whatever tool that is that you use. You have all of your work items there that you have learned over the years to keep track of, to put them there so it's visualized for the entire team, to know who is working on what, and so you can collaborate and know, whether or not you're working on the right things. Keep the information about each task item in the task item itself. Use fields, use comments, use whatever means necessary, but keep the information together in the task items. So if another person from your team needs information, they can literally go to that task item and read through it. That's the fastest tip that I can give you right now, but it is a much larger effort because it requires a culture change.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with you. I think something that's been really interesting with the asynchronous communication piece, and I've kind of been experimenting with that a little bit. I think, sometimes for example, I might receive a phone call and it's just not the right time for me to answer that call for whatever reason, because either I'm in flow or I'm doing something else, or I know that I'm about to go into a podcast recording, etc. So often someone leaving a voicemail and responding to it in my own time is I guess, a form of asynchronous communication. But another sort of tool that I've been looking at and sort of playing around with is a tool, for example, called Voxer, which is kind of like a walkie-talkie type app where people can leave each other messages and you can respond, whether it's your team member or something, responding to those messages at a time that's convenient for them. So I really like that. I think that's a really a good description of the two different types of communication. And I think it's in terms of your other comment around sort of knowledge, and one of the things we try to do with clients is build them the knowledge center that underpins all the work that they do. So your example around, simple task management absolutely makes sense, because it makes it easier for anyone to not only track and manage, but find the information that they're looking for. And so setting up those knowledge centers using different types of tools, whether it is, your Atlassian tools or Microsoft Office Teams or whatever the case may be, it's definitely
Actually, let's
very
just pause
important.
there. Let's just pause there and clarify something. When I ask people to name their communication tools, they actually usually say Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or tools that are made for synchronous methods of communication. Almost nobody mentions their task management or project management tool as a communication tool.
No.
So that's what I want to emphasize here. That is a communication tool. Use it, utilize it to be empowered in your interactions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing as well, I don't know if you're seeing this with your clients, but with the sort of cold rise of COVID and people flocking to remote work because it's been out of necessity for more companies than by choice. I think maybe the investment in tools has maybe not followed through as well as it could or should do. And I know that there was quite a quick reaction in trying to get on Zoom and get on Teams and and I've seen a lot of clients that have just gone and purchased tools and maybe not spent the time to think about how those tools are going to work for their teams and getting them set up in the best way to enable them to be as effective as possible. Are you seeing that with clients you've been working with?
Oh my goodness, yes. Usually I go into a client's company and I see that they have purchased, like it's happening right now a lot more than it used to. They have bought tool after tool after tool without having a strategic thinking behind why they're buying all these tools. So I go in and I see they're using so many different tools for the very same thing. They have like one client that I work with, they had Confluence from Atlassian, they had TechSpot, they had SharePoint from Microsoft, they had their own internal wiki and another wiki where they use their technical requirements. And I thought, oh my goodness, all of these tools are made for the same thing. Why do we have that?
Yeah.
And that was only right before I learned that they also use Teams plus Skype plus Google Meets plus Zoom and all these other things, like all these other video conferencing tools that are all there to make video conferencing possible.
Yes.
So yes, I think this is a symptom though, Fatima. This is not a problem on its own. It's a symptom that people have not really put remote working as a strategic priority for their company. Many companies that were forced to work remotely in 2020, if you ask them right now in the beginning of 2021, they would think that they've figured it out without ever getting expert help, right? And it's as funny as somebody saying, yeah, we bought Jira, therefore we're agile.
Oh, 100%.
You know, it's really as funny as that. When I hear that, people are like, yeah, we've figured it out. We've been working remotely for a year. And I look at how they work remotely and it's a disaster.
Yes.
But
yes.
yeah, I am totally with you on that. It's happening over and over.
I see it a lot in the project management space. So outside communication, when we think about project portfolio management tools and things like that. But generally, I call it the project tools monopoly because people are accumulating tools like their properties and, as if they're going to get some big return on their investment. But as you said, there's no strategic overlay. Another client more recently, as an example, not just in communication, but across their business, working with a client who just has such a fragmented approach. We've got HR that's got systems, you've got finance that's got systems, internal audit's got a system. They're just completely fragmented and they don't even talk to each other, these systems. So it's actually, a real imperative for them to maybe look at how not only are they spending money or wasting some money on these tools, but how these tools talk to each other so that their teams can talk to each other better as well. So
exactly. We have the opposite problem too, though. There are some organizations that have been using enterprise tools like ERP systems, and they have the opposite problem that every system that they had is by default working together is just not effective for them. It is not designed for an agile environment. It is not designed for a distributed, like a fully remote organization. Yes. So there is like these two complete ends of the spectrum, and then there is everything in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with you. Well, one of the other things I wanted to touch on, and I know we could probably keep talking about this stuff for many, many hours, and I think we may have to have a follow-up, but I'm interested to know when you think about, introducing or improving or uplifting an organization who is trying to do remote working, now that there's a lot of companies, most companies are on the board with that, whether they're doing a great job or not, we can talk about that later, but I'm interested to know your approach. Do you like to help organizations approach it rather from a top-down perspective, or do you do a bit of bottom-up, top-down? Like, what's the typical approach, or is it vary by company?
It is varied by company. That's the short answer. The long answer is I'm an agile coach in my heart. So everything I do with my remote work coaching is very similar to how I would approach this from an agile coaching perspective. If the organization has been working with these tools and processes for a long time, I recognize that and I go to, different leaders and try to get them on board. It happens like both ways. Sometimes it's top down, sometimes it's bottom up, but most times it starts with an introduction that is for everybody. It's usually a webinar that I do, and everyone gets to hear my ideas, the way that I challenge their status quo, their default ways of thinking. And usually people are so excited afterwards, and then we get started, and it becomes both a combination of top down and bottom up. It will never work if it is only top down or only bottom up. But sometimes despite my agile coach, like my inner agile coach, screaming and saying, don't make it a mandate, sometimes it has to be a mandate. Like a CTO, a CIO need to talk together and need to decide which tools they are going to remove.
Yeah.
Because they have bought so many tools for the same purpose. But this decision has to be made with the input of the people that actually use those tools. And we should include everybody and put that into practice. I've done a lot of reading and a lot of practice in sociocracy, so that also feeds into how I lead and coach an organization.
The other thing as well that I'm familiar with regards to your strengths is your gallop strength. Your top gallop strength is includer. How is that? And that's been consistent for you for many years. How has that gallop strength shaped your work, and how do you recommend others utilize their strengths for their careers?
Did I tell you about that, or did you read that somewhere? Because that is true.
We did some research. We do research on this show. But yeah, it's
very cool.
It's very interesting. But I'd love to, if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I've done the gallop test several times and at different ages, and things have changed. The themes of my personality have changed, but the top one has never changed. And the top one is indeed includer. So the way that it has played on me, it has played a very significant role in the way that I work, in the way that I communicate, is that I see individuals for who they are, and I don't usually pass any judgment. And I sometimes even have trouble seeing a group of people and labeling them as such. So it's very common when you go in an organization and they tell you this is the AI team, this is the data team, this is the web team, this is the iOS team, and they all have these labels. When I go in, I see individuals, and I see each person with their own strengths, with their own struggles, with their own challenges, with how they communicate, how they use the tools, and how they understand the system. So that plays a big role in how I approach problem solving and how I approach my coaching and my business leadership, really. In the event that I created, in the conference that we started this podcast episode with, it did play a big role because I wanted to bring this idea to as many people as possible, regardless of their skin color, ability to travel, which was something that I struggled with for many years because I needed the visas to go to all my favorite conferences. And I wanted it to be available for people of different incomes. Now, when we think about inclusion, when people talk about diversity, they almost never think about these aspects that I just mentioned.
Yes.
Like income level almost never comes into the conversation, but I wanted that to be part of it. I wanted a person with no income at all who's interested in the topic to be able to attend it. And that's why I created it as a free conference, so everybody could just join in. The only requirement was that they needed to have the ability to go and open a web browser. I didn't even use a tool. Well, to be fair, at the time there weren't that many online conference platforms. Like there's so many popped up in 2020. At the time there wasn't any, but there was the possibility of streaming talks onto Facebook and YouTube. And I thought, Facebook is banned in a lot of internal networks of organizations, and I know that the people who are going to be attending will be sitting at their desk in their office. Therefore, it needs to be possible on a web browser, and it needs not to, be flagged by any firewall. Like it needs to be clean. And that was my top requirement for the tech team that was working on making the conference happen. So talking about inclusion, like it goes really, really deep in my personality. At the same time, I am married to a wonderful man who uses a wheelchair. And that alone has opened my horizon to understanding the challenges that come with different disabilities. So he is a very strong and independent person. He doesn't need a lot of help from me. But just seeing him and seeing the different ways that he interacts with the world around him has made me curious to understand what other types of disabilities impact people. For example, one of the things that I learned early on was how many people in the world are actually colorblind, but they never say it. 1 out of every 12 men have colorblindness. 1 out of every 200 women have colorblindness. And I'm sure that in your organization, if it's large enough, you will have a colleague who is colorblind. Maybe it is you who's listening to this, but we don't talk about it. And then we go into these presentations from executives that show the color red and green to indicate good or bad, whether or not the progress is on track or not. And people who are colorblind have trouble seeing the difference between those two colors. So that's another part of how I design everything when it comes to effective communication. I think about these little tiny details that impact individuals.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that personal story. I think I can definitely share your sentiment on inclusion and, your example around colorblindness, that effectively is invisible. And I spend a lot of time talking and trying to make sure that those that may be suffering from a mental health disorder that, maybe don't want to speak up about it or feel ashamed of saying anything, feel welcomed and feel supported, because a lot of the time, some people that have struggles in that space maybe not feel comfortable in a room full of people getting up at the front of a room. And sometimes you got to take these things into account. And the colorblindness is another example of that, where again, I've seen instances in previous roles, not in our organization today, but in larger organizations, where that actually has been an issue that someone has raised, to the project management office, preparing these reports for these executives and so forth. So I think having the opportunity to be understanding and as you've demonstrated, being very inclusive. And also what I like to say as well is not making assumptions around people, what they do or what struggles they may have, whether it be physical, mental, or other in the sort of background of their lives, because everybody's got their own battles. So I think it's really important, and I'm glad that you shared that. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I want to just add one little anecdote about the question you asked me earlier about whether or not remote work is for everyone.
Yes.
Bringing that inclusion into the mix. I know that some of you heard my answer where I said yes, and you felt in your body that's not for me. It's not going to work for me. And that's the thing. When I hear that, when I see that, I talk to the individual and I try to understand the person. And it has happened in the past, in the beginning of COVID in Sweden. Well, Sweden never went into a lockdown. And I had a Swedish client at the time, and they had a work from home requirement or recommendation for people, but people could work from an office if they wanted to. And I had a team where 3 members were really struggling. They were very close to having clinical mental health problems. And therefore, after, recognizing that and talking to them, it was accepted that they go back to the office, and I supported that. So I designed the way that I work around them, around the need that they had to work from an office 1 day a week. Well, that was, what was decided afterwards by themselves. But yeah, that's just something to remember, that even if it is about one thing that I'm super passionate about, which is remote working and making it possible for everybody, it's okay to work from an office. As long as we recognize and we acknowledge that even if you work from an office, you have colleagues who are elsewhere. And that means, regardless, you need to learn remote working. You need to learn how to do everything that is required to communicate effectively remotely, because not everybody is with you in that office.
Absolutely. I think definitely is something key that people should take away from today's conversation. Even with the whole sort of remote working and working with people and seeing them online, I've had a number of instances where some people have got a really comfortable working from home space. Others do not. Some are in their garages, some are in, hallways, on washing baskets. Like there's so many different approaches that people have had to take to be agile and flexible in the way that they work from home. So I think having the option of being able to go into an office is absolutely always important, just like it is having a co-working space to go to. So I think that's a very, very important message. I do want to circle back just on languages. So I know I usually like to say that even though you're working with different people across different cultures, when it comes to project management, and I think the same is true of Agile, we all speak a different language. And I don't mean the 5 languages that you speak, which we'll get to in a second, but more just even the way we communicate, the way that I talk about project management or Agile and the way that you do would be different. And so I think being inclusive and understanding from those people's perspective, from other person's perspective, is really important. It definitely plays a role. But you speak 5 languages, is that correct?
I speak 3 languages fluently and 2 languages not so fluently, but I can get myself understood and understand people. So maybe I wouldn't work professionally with the other 2, but yeah, I can manage.
Beautiful. I noticed Spanish is one of them. Is that one of your fluent ones or one of the ones you're getting better at?
No, it's actually the one that I'm investing at least an hour a day to learn right now. But yeah, I started learning Spanish in 2010, so it's been a long time. And I have a sister in Spain, so I kind of need to learn that.
Amazing. Well, my husband is from El Salvador, so I've been learning Spanish since 2013, and I'm also probably about half an hour a day in learning as well.
Oh my God,
so
we should totally switch, right?
we should exchange. Maybe we'll have a podcast in Spanish in 10 years' time, and we can exchange conversation in
Yeah, it's
another
not a
language.
language that flows through you, right? And the
Absolutely.
languages that I'm fluent at, they are all from very different language families. So, like,
Yes.
if you know a Latin language, it's so much
Yes.
easier for you to learn a new one. Like my sister, who's in Spain, she spoke Italian fluently. So when she moved to Spain, it took her like 2 months to become fluent in Spanish, and I was so jealous. But I
Yeah.
speak Swedish, which is a Germanic language, and I speak English, which is, well, a Latin language, but it's
Hmm.
very different from French and Spanish. And
Yes.
I speak Farsi, which is a completely different language. So those are my 3 fluent languages.
Amazing. That's excellent. I've got so many more questions. I know we're not going to have enough time for all of them. So I'm just trying to work out like which ones do I want to go to. I probably got maybe I've got probably got a couple more that are really like I'm really interested in your thoughts on. So obviously with the whole agile space, and I've been seeing this for the last 5 or 6 years while running Agile Management Office, but a lot of the time there is either some or many people that we're faced with that are effectively in doubt or have restraints around what it is we're trying to do with when it comes to agile. I know that you've got a software development background, which means you've got the theory and the technical side, and then you've got the coaching side. I'm interested to know, how do you deal with doubts or restraints from people that are maybe not on the agile train?
So are you asking me about the technical challenges that it brings, or the psychological challenges that it
Yeah,
brings?
more the psychological, getting that culture change. Some people just don't really want to change. So I'm interested to know what your thoughts are there.
So people perceive information in different ways, right? And I'm not only talking about auditory, visual, tactile kind of thing, but they also perceive the world in different ways. So I know of a few different models that can help people to recognize how it is that they perceive the model. But I often use those models for myself first. As in, I try to have conversations with individuals, as I said, and try to understand what it is that takes them. So if a person is perceiving the world through numbers and data, I adapt my message with numbers and data so that they understand it. If it is a person who understands the world through systems, I give them systems thinking. I give them the language of systems. So as I said, like I adapt my own communication method to get the message across. Now, what I really want to hone down is why we do things the way we do them. And it's a quite interesting thing to say that in so many organizations that I've worked with, there were agile coaches before me. And yet, when I entered the organization, as soon as I gained the trust of the people, I got the question, why do we need to be agile? And it might be surprising because I expect the previous agile coaches to have already communicated this. But the answer to why we need to be agile, why no longer waterfall, was never answered. So once again, I go back to why. Just yesterday, I was helping a team that is very, very, very new to Agile. And this was their first sprint planning, and they were struggling with understanding the idea of estimations, which comes with Scrum. And just there, I paused them and I asked them, why do we do estimations? And this team was like, so we can know how much our velocity is. And I say, why do we need to know our velocity? And he said, so we can know our capacity. I say, why do we need our capacity? So I help them to really understand why they're doing something that they're doing and what is the long-term impact of it. So why do we need to be agile? Why do we need to do this? Why do we need to do that? And this why question only speaks to a certain type of people. And by type, I mean people who perceive the world in a certain way. For another group, I might have to give them the emotional motivators for, how it's going to impact the way that they are going to feel in the long term, how they're going to feel in the team. So yeah, as I said, adaptive coaching is my style, and I do teach that, and I recommend that people actually learn how to do this. And I do teach that through introducing all these different models that I have acquired through the years.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. That's very helpful. I think everyone these days thinks there's a lot of people that think they're a coach, and learning a little bit more about you and your background and reading about it, I can definitely see what real coaching means. So I think that it's going to be really helpful for people.
That's such a sweet compliment.
You're very welcome.
I think like there is so much I don't know. Maybe that's what a good coach needs to have, right?
100%. We're always learning. 100%.
Yeah, like every year we learn so much, and then we also learn how much we don't know.
Exactly. And I think as long as you're open and always learning, then you're continuously growing, and then you learn from different experiences that then you can share with your, your clients and people you work with. And I think it's just that evolving cycle, just like we would do in the sort of learning cycles of retrospectives in an agile world. So
exactly. That's actually why I have online courses and online workshops for individuals who, whose company does not necessarily want to work with my company and with my coaches, but they just want to invest in themselves as individuals and just learn something. Like my favorite one in terms of creation, that was my favorite, but I do have, like, I love all the courses equally, but this one seems to also make a big impact. It's called Online Facilitation. And that's where I teach people a lot about the mindset of remote first, a lot about how to actually perceive other people's communication style without needing to interact with them too much, without needing to ask like so many revealing questions, and also how to facilitate outside of meetings, because most people think facilitation only applies to meetings. And in this particular course, I'm quite proud of this, that I've managed to convey this knowledge to people of how to facilitate outside of meetings.
And I think I've seen some reviews or feedback online from people that have undertaken it. So it has had a positive response. I think.
Yeah, aren't my students the best?
Yeah, definitely. And keep coming back, which is another positive thing as well. But I'll definitely will include that in the show notes. So where can people get more information about you? How can they get involved with remote working and your conference?
There is a very easy way to do so. You can go to my website. That's remoteforever.com. That's just one word, no hyphen, no nothing, remoteforever.com. And on social media, on Twitter and Instagram mostly, you can find me at Remote Forever. I'm also on Clubhouse, and I host 2 rooms at the moment. It might increase in the future. I also go with @RemoteForever on Clubhouse. And on Facebook and LinkedIn, you can just search for Remote Forever as a company page. And on LinkedIn, I also am quite active on my personal profile too. And I'm a networker. So if you invite me, I'll accept you.
Wonderful. I think I'll include all of that in the notes as well, so people can be in touch with you. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners, a call to action, a piece of advice, or a question to ponder before we wrap up for today?
I might actually like to have a gift to your listeners. So
Sure.
a lot of people who are interested in learning how to work effectively remotely, they go, like, if you're in the middle of an agile transformation specifically, it's usually pretty difficult to understand the value of planning, the value of retrospectives and all that. And I created a game to help people learn that. And it's called the Game of Circles. So if you go to my website, you can actually find a link to on the blog post. You can read a lot about what the game is and why I created it and all of that. And at the bottom of the page, you'll have a sign up link where if you sign up, you'll get a template of the game in Miro and one in Miral, which are digital whiteboards where the game is actually taking place. And you'll also get a facilitation note, which helps you facilitate the game for your team. And it not only is a high energy game, but it also really hones down the idea of collaboration in a remote environment afterwards. So it's a really effective game, I think. I get a lot of positive feedback from that. So I'd be happy to share that with you.
That would be amazing. I'll also include that in the show notes. And yeah, definitely Miro is a fantastic tool that it's being used quite frequently and a lot more by a lot of people. So that it'd be really interesting. I might even check that out for our team as well. So thank you for that very generous offer. We much appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And thank you so much, Fatima, for having me and for asking me all these amazing and interesting questions. It's been a good conversation.
Definitely. I think we'll probably will end up talking again, no doubt, or maybe even continue the conversation. There's a lot more questions that I think are really prominent now in the environment that we're in with the rise of Agile and the rise of COVID. And I think that everything you've shared today would be absolutely beneficial. So thank you so much for your time and look forward to talking to you again in the coming future.
Thank you so much once again for having me. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you in the future. Maybe when you launch your podcast in Spanish.
Yes,
Joking.
definitely. I did a webinar recently and I've got to get into the podcast in Spanish, but I'm not fluent enough. So maybe we'll be another 10
I feel the same.
years.
I feel the same with Spanish.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please share this with someone or rate it if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and to stay up to date with all things Agile ideas, go to our website www.agilemanagementoffice.com. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea?